The strangest thing about losing yourself is that nothing actually stops. Time doesn't pause. People don't notice. Life keeps moving, just without your participation. That's how it happened to me. I didn't wake up one morning and decide to disappear. I didn't make a dramatic mistake or suffer a single defining trauma. What I did instead was much quieter. I stopped stepping forward. At some point, I began to live my life from a distance, like a spectator who forgot they were allowed to influence the story. Days unfolded in front of me. Decisions were made. Conversations happened. Milestones arrived. And I was there, technically, but not inside any of it. I used to think this was normal. That adulthood simply felt this way. That the intensity of being young faded, and what replaced it was routine, responsibility, realism. I told myself this was maturity. But maturity doesn't feel like absence. Looking back, I can't pinpoint the exact moment it started. There was no clear before and after. Just a gradual shift, like stepping half a pace back from my own life and never stepping forward again. I learned how to function without feeling. How to respond without reacting. How to move through days without leaving fingerprints on them. People described me as calm. Grounded. Reliable. Inside, I felt like I was watching someone else perform those traits. The first warning sign was time. Not how fast it passed, but how little of it I could remember. Weeks blurred together. I struggled to recall what I had felt yesterday, last month, even last year. Events didn't anchor themselves in my memory because I wasn't fully present when they happened. I lived efficiently, but not vividly. I remember sitting in a room full of people once, listening to laughter, watching conversations overlap, and suddenly realizing that I felt no urgency to contribute. Not because I had nothing to say, but because saying something felt optional. That thought terrified me. Because participation had become optional in my own mind. I started saying yes automatically. No reflection, no resistance. Yes to plans, yes to paths, yes to expectations. Not because I wanted them, but because refusing would require engagement. And engagement felt exhausting. It was easier to let things happen to me. I told myself I was adaptable. Flexible. Low drama. I told myself that caring less was a form of strength. That detachment was protection. What I didn't realize was that detachment was turning into disappearance. I stopped imagining the future. Not because I was depressed, but because imagining required desire, and desire felt distant. My future became an extension of my present, and my present felt like maintenance. Wake up. Do what's required. Go to sleep. Repeat. Nothing was wrong enough to fix. Nothing hurt enough to justify change. My life was functional, and that made it dangerous. Because when life doesn't break, you don't think to examine it. People around me moved forward visibly. They made changes. Took risks. Failed. Recovered. Built stories they could tell. I listened to them and nodded and offered thoughtful responses. And then I went home and felt empty. Not lonely. Empty. The emptiness wasn't painful at first. It was neutral. Flat. Like emotional static. I assumed it would pass. It didn't. Instead, it expanded. I started to feel disconnected from my own reactions. Things that should have mattered didn't move me. Things that once excited me felt distant, like memories belonging to someone else. I watched my life accumulate, responsibilities, commitments, labels, and none of them felt anchored to a choice I remembered making. That's when the thought arrived, quiet and unsettling: when did I stop deciding? I realized how often I deferred. To timing. To logic. To other people's confidence. I waited for clarity that never came, and in the absence of clarity, I stayed still. Stillness turned into habit. Habit turned into identity. I wasn't stuck. I was absent. And absence has a strange quality: it doesn't hurt sharply enough to demand action. It just drains meaning slowly, until one day you look around and realize you've been living on the edge of your own life. The moment I truly saw it wasn't dramatic. I was watching a train leave the station, people inside moving toward destinations they had chosen, and I felt something snap inside me. Not envy. Recognition. I realized that for years, my life had been moving forward the same way, carried by momentum, not intention. I was on the train, but I hadn't chosen the direction in a long time. And worse, I hadn't noticed. That realization hit me harder than any crisis could have. Because it meant my life wasn't happening to me. It was happening without me. Once I understood that my life was happening without me, I tried to step back in. That sounds simple. It wasn't. You don't just return to your own life after being absent for years. You don't flip a switch and suddenly feel present, motivated, alive. What you feel first is disorientation, like waking up in a place you technically recognize but don't emotionally belong to anymore. I started paying attention on purpose. To my days. To my reactions. To the constant distance between what was happening and what I felt. That distance scared me. I expected that once I noticed it, it would shrink. Instead, it became clearer. Sharper. I saw how much of my behavior was automatic, how rarely I paused to ask whether something actually mattered to me. I realized I had been living on approval and momentum alone. Momentum is dangerous. It carries you forward even when you're no longer conscious. Even when the direction doesn't fit you anymore. Even when you've changed. I tried small experiments. Saying no when I usually said yes. Slowing down instead of rushing through decisions. Letting questions linger instead of resolving them immediately. Every attempt felt wrong in my body. My chest tightened. My thoughts raced. Guilt appeared instantly, as if I had violated an unspoken rule. I felt selfish for wanting clarity. Weak for feeling lost. Ungrateful for questioning a life that looked fine. That guilt was familiar. I had lived inside it for years without naming it. I started noticing how often I minimized my own discomfort. How quickly I explained it away. If something felt off, I told myself I was overthinking. If I felt restless, I blamed stress. If I felt empty, I called it fatigue. I had language for everything, except the truth. The truth was harder to say. I didn't feel like I was living my own life anymore. That realization triggered panic. Not explosive panic, controlled panic. The kind that sits quietly in your chest and asks impossible questions. How long has it been like this? What if I can't get back what I lost? What if this numbness is permanent? I started counting time in a way I never had before. Not years, but missed moments. Decisions I never made. Paths I never explored because staying passive felt safer. I grieved possibilities that never had a chance to fail. That grief was heavy. Because you can't argue with lost time. You can't negotiate with it or explain it away. It doesn't care how reasonable your reasons were. Time only cares whether you showed up. And I hadn't. I tried to remember the last moment I felt fully engaged with my life, not performing, not managing, not coping, but choosing. The memory was disturbingly old. I realized that my absence hadn't started with numbness. It had started with caution. I had learned to delay decisions until I felt certain. To wait until I had enough information. To avoid irreversible choices. I believed patience was wisdom. What it became was paralysis. While I waited for certainty, life filled in the blanks for me. Opportunities passed quietly. Direction solidified without my input. People formed expectations I never challenged. My life didn't pause while I waited. It continued. And the longer I stayed absent, the harder it became to imagine stepping back in. Responsibility felt overwhelming. Choice felt risky. Desire felt unreliable. I had trained myself not to want too much. That realization hurt more than anything else. Because it meant my absence wasn't an accident. It was a coping strategy. A way to avoid disappointment, conflict, failure. By watching instead of acting, I protected myself from blame. But I also removed myself from meaning. I started to feel anger, not at anyone else, but at myself. Anger for being careful at the cost of being alive. For confusing safety with neutrality. For letting days turn into years without demanding more from myself. That anger scared me. Because it had nowhere to go. I wasn't in a crisis. I couldn't point to a single thing that needed to be escaped. There was no clear exit, no dramatic break that would justify leaving. And yet, staying felt unbearable. That contradiction tore at me. I felt trapped between two fears, the fear of changing too late, and the fear of changing unnecessarily. The fear of discovering I had wasted my life, and the fear of destroying it out of restlessness. Both fears felt valid. So I froze. For a while, nothing changed externally. I still showed up. Still performed. Still lived the life people recognized. But internally, something had shifted. I could no longer unsee my absence. Every automatic yes felt heavier. Every day that passed without intention felt like theft, not by someone else, but by my own inaction. I understood then that trying to ease back into life wasn't going to work. Presence doesn't return gradually when absence has become a habit. At some point, you have to interrupt the pattern. And interruption is uncomfortable. I reached a moment, quiet, unremarkable on the outside, where I realized something with terrifying clarity: if I don't choose something soon, life will continue choosing for me. And it will not choose what I would have wanted. That thought landed like a verdict. I didn't know yet what I would choose. I didn't have a plan, a vision, or confidence. All I had was a growing certainty that watching my life from the sidelines was no longer an option. Because the longer I stayed absent, the more permanent that absence became. And I was running out of time to return before there was nothing left to return to. The moment I returned to my life didn't look like a return. It looked like interruption. There was no surge of clarity, no sudden confidence, no internal announcement that I was back. What happened instead was smaller and far more unsettling. I made a choice without waiting to feel ready. Not a perfect choice. Not a heroic one. Just a real one. I chose something because it felt true in my body, even though my mind couldn't fully justify it yet. That was new. For years, I had waited for certainty before acting. I had treated doubt like a stop sign. This time, I treated it like a passenger, present, nervous, but not in control. My hands shook when I followed through. My thoughts argued with me constantly. Every part of me that had learned to survive by watching instead of acting warned me that I was making a mistake. But beneath the fear, there was something else. Wait. For the first time in years, my decision felt heavy in a meaningful way. It had consequences. It required me to show up. It couldn't be undone quietly. It belonged to me. The aftermath wasn't easy. I felt exposed. Unprotected. Like I had stepped into the open without armor. The old numbness tried to pull me back, offering familiarity and comfort, reminding me how easy it would be to return to watching instead of participating. I understood then that absence had been a shelter. A poor one, but familiar. Presence demanded effort. Attention. Accountability. It forced me to feel emotions I had flattened for years. Regret surfaced sharply. So did fear. So did grief for everything I couldn't undo. I didn't push those feelings away. I let them exist. That was part of returning. I began to notice my days again, not because they were suddenly joyful, but because they were no longer automatic. Time slowed in a way that felt almost painful. Moments stretched. Decisions lingered. I could trace my actions back to intentions instead of habits. Some days, I hated that. It was easier to be absent. But absence had already taken enough from me. I made more choices. Small ones at first. Saying no without over-explaining. Saying yes when it scared me instead of when it was expected. Allowing uncertainty to remain unresolved without immediately anesthetizing it with logic. Each choice felt like friction against years of conditioning. I disappointed people. That part hurt more than I expected. Not because they were cruel, but because I saw clearly how much of my previous role had been to make things easier for everyone else. When I stopped doing that automatically, the system adjusted. Some relationships thinned. Some dynamics changed. A few connections quietly disappeared. I let them. Not because I didn't care, but because clinging to them would have required me to disappear again. What surprised me most was how my body responded over time. The constant low-level tension I had carried for years began to shift. Not vanish, but change. It became situational instead of permanent. I felt tired for real reasons now, not existential ones. Even sadness felt different. It had shape. I stopped asking whether I had returned too late. That question only led to paralysis. Instead, I asked something simpler and more dangerous: what can I still choose today? That question didn't care about my past. It didn't negotiate with regret. It didn't promise redemption. It only asked for participation. So I participated. Some days poorly. Some days clumsily. Some days with doubt so loud it nearly drowned everything else out. But I showed up. And showing up changed something essential. I realized that my life hadn't been stolen. It hadn't even been ruined. It had been unattended. And unattended things don't scream. They fade. The final truth I had to accept was this: I would never get back the years I spent watching. I couldn't relive them. I couldn't redeem them retroactively. But I could stop adding to them. That understanding didn't bring peace. It brought resolve. I no longer confuse presence with comfort. Presence is demanding. It requires that you feel what you feel, choose without guarantees, and accept that some clarity only comes after action, not before. I had spent years waiting to feel ready. Readiness never arrived. Action did. If there is a confession at the heart of this story, it's this: I didn't lose my life in a tragedy. I almost lost it in waiting. Waiting to be certain. Waiting to be confident. Waiting to be someone else. Life doesn't wait with you. It keeps moving, quietly assigning meaning to whatever you allow to happen. I watched my life happen without me for a long time. Now, even when I'm afraid, even when I don't fully trust myself yet, I choose to be inside it. Not because I'm sure. But because absence costs more than failure ever could. I don't know how much time I have left to live deliberately. But I know this: I'm done watching. And that, finally, feels like being alive.